So I'm one of the people who does not have a PowerPoint presentation today, but just wanted to start off with a little bit of background about Match Group. For those of you who aren't familiar, we've got a portfolio of widely recognized online dating brands, obviously Match.com, but we also own brands like Tinder, OkCupid, Our Time, and Black People Meet, and a number of other affinity type sites. We have we're generally a paid or free to communicate product, whether it's Match.com, which is kind of a hard paywall where you have to pay to actually talk to somebody else, or a freemium type model like Tinder where you can start talking, and if you want to pay for more premium features, you can go to an upgraded experience. Overall, we have around 7 million average subscribers, and then millions more free users. We are an 18 and over only platform where you have to enter in, a valid birthday that's greater than 18 in order to become a member. As far as the structure of our content moderation and community teams, we have a group that includes leaders from the risk, fraud, community, and legal teams that meet on a approximately monthly basis to address content moderation and safety issues. And that group will set high-level direction that will then go and get filtered down to the various different brands that we operate. Overall, our community and fraud teams is a relatively large portion of our organization. We've got around 1,400 employees total at our various brands, and we've got over 300 people who are involved in community and content moderation issues, both on an in-house and outsourced basis. Again, like I said, each platform does have its own content moderation community team, and they each have their own structure. So I'm not going to go into kind of each of those different brands, but I will kind of give you an overview of two of our biggest US brands, which are Tinder and Match.com. At Tinder, we've got a director of global community, and he's responsible for all of the community and moderation functions, including training, engaging with outsourced vendors, et cetera, and he reports directly into the CEO of Tinder. He's got about 15 in-house direct reports, and then there's a separate anti-fraud team of about 10 folks. And then Tinder operates with outsourced resources for a lot of its community moderation functions, and we've got vendors in a couple different countries, and we've got around 100 people doing content moderation full-time, 24/7. On the Match side, again, we've got somebody who's the director of community, responsible for all community and content moderation functions, again, engaging with outsourced vendors. And then we've got a director of training on the Match.com side to manage the training of the outsourced teams. Both of those people report directly into the SVP of operations for Match. On the Match side, we've got about 30 in-house resources on the community and content moderation side, and an anti-fraud team of about 15 people, which again separately reports up to the SVP of operations. On the Match side, we've got around 175 community agents, and 60 of those people are engaged full-time in moderation, again, in a couple different countries. We'll have similar teams, again, on a scaled basis that will work for our other US brands who have similar functions and setups. Each brand does have their own set of written guidelines as far as what the agents are supposed to be looking for and doing on the content moderation side. It addresses a wide range of different things: hate speech, sexual content, violent content, copyright, using the site for commercial purposes, or underage users, which are a little bit more unique to what we do as Match. These are, while they can differ slightly, are generally consistent across our different brands, just based on the fact that some of the brands have a different focus. than others. And then the community team in-house will do quality reviews with the moderators to make sure that they are moderating consistent with the written guidance that we've provided. Going a little bit more in depth on the actual moderation aspect, just wanted to kind of give a broad overview of our approach. Our platforms are not unique, but relatively unique in that people are not engaging with people they already know on our platforms. When you're doing online dating, you're generally looking to meet somebody new who you haven't yet met. And so our content moderation is focused on making the experience as safe as possible, as high quality of an experience as possible. To that end, we really do give people who report bad behavior the benefit of the doubt. We have a zero tolerance policy for inappropriate behavior and improper use of our platform. Also, because of the nature of our platform, we're not somewhere where people engage in things like political speech. It's not a general use site. It's very narrowly targeted with kind of one goal in mind for the users. And so if you're not on the site working towards that goal, and your content is obviously not working towards that goal, your content is going to get removed, and you as a user are also going to get removed. You know, our general mantra is people are on our site looking for love. They're not there to engage in hate or other bad behavior. And so if you're doing those sorts of things, you're going to get removed. Again, just kind of broadly, we kind of think about this in three categories, and we kind of work towards having a fulsome set of policies and procedures in these three categories. We talk about educating our users, talk about detecting and preventing inappropriate content, and then we talk about responding to and remediating any bad content. So we take a lot of efforts to inform our users what is and isn't permitted on the site, either through onboarding flows or FAQs or community guidelines or the like. Some of our sites also have a pledge to say I will or won't engage in this sort of behavior. On the detection and prevention side, we do have an array of different technologies working. We have a lot of, as I said before, human resources to find and eliminate bad content, hopefully before people see it. Things like keyword searches, escalation of reviews, photo searching or hashing, a lot of review for fraudulent type of behavior. For example, if you're trying to send 100 messages in the first minute, you probably can figure out that you're a bot pretty easily. And then, we do have a very robust set of users on our site who really take the mission of the site to heart, no pun intended, and do a great job reporting bad actions. And so we really do take a lot of pride in looking through those reports and making sure that we get the bad actors off of our sites. On the response and remediation side, again, blocking photos, blocking profiles, reporting to law enforcement when permitted and when necessary. So I hope this gives a good overview of our content moderation practices. I think, as Eric said at the beginning, Section 230 is really what allows us to make those decisions, to do it the way that we want, to do it the way that we think is effective for our users, and to promote the safety and well-being of the online dating ecosystem. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Becky Foley. I'm the Director of Content Moderation for Tripadvisor. So I'll go over a high-level overview of how my team is organized, a brief overview of the moderation procedures, and how we set content policy. So on my team, we are separated, that looked a lot better on my version, but we're separated by 3 department areas. We have fraud, content moderation, and I have a small vendor management team. So on the fraud side, that team is responsible for trying to find the reviews that are submitted to Tripadvisor maliciously with the intent to either boost a property's popularity index ranking or to what we call vandalize, so bring that ranking down. So people that come to our site are typically trying to do one of those two behaviors if they're trying to commit fraud. And that usually lives only on the review side. On the content side, that team is responsible for looking at the context of all user-generated content on our site. So that is reviews, responses to those reviews, so owners can respond to reviews, photos. We also have Tripadvisor forums. So the teams are responsible for making sure that all of that content is relevant and helpful to travelers. And then, like I said, I have a vendor management team. They're responsible for managing the quality and setting strategy for the vendors that we work with on the content team, so our outsourcing providers. In terms of volume, Tripadvisor gets 270 user-generated contributions per minute. That represents 600 million posted reviews and over 125 million photos. One thing that we've learned in the last 18 years of doing content moderation is that technology works, but you still need people. So in terms of how we approach content moderation, it differs depending on the content type. So forums, for example, we have very little to no upfront moderation processes. We rely solely on our user community to report inappropriate content in the forums. On the other hand, reviews go through an initial set of complex machine learning algorithms, filters, rules, et cetera, to determine whether or not they are safe to be posted. A very small percentage of reviews are deemed not safe to post automatically on submission, and that small percentage goes to my team for manual review prior to publication. An even smaller percent, so less than 1% of reviews get reported after they've been posted. So you probably think, people are reporting left and right, et cetera. We actually have a lot of really positive, great content on the site that never gets reported. We have a lot of very active community members and owners that do report content, but it ends up being less than 1% of what is posted. So I think a lot of people end up being surprised by that. The moderation team is made up of 150 to 250 content moderators around the globe. That represents 8 offices and 28 languages. We do have in-house representation for each of the languages that we support on the site. I think that's super important because we make sure that when we're evaluating a review that might be a complex review to determine if it should be published or removed, that local perspective is really important a lot of times. Obviously, languages can be nuanced. It's really important that we've got somebody in-house that's able to help make that decision. The reason that we are between 150 to 250 people at any given time is because Tripadvisor has very seasonal volume. You can imagine most people travel in July, August, September, so we get most of our content submitted in those months. So right now, my team is gearing up, getting prepared for the busy summer months, and we are hiring between 50 and 70 people to be ready for our July push. So that does take a significant amount of training resource, as you can imagine. And then after October, we'll go back to our normal volumes with our stable staff. So in terms of policy changes, Tripadvisor typically takes 2 approaches to policy. One is that we empower the business unit owners to make policy changes directly. This kind of is in line with Tripadvisor's mantra of speed wins. We want to try and do stuff fast. An example of this would be changes to a profanity list that might stop a review from being auto-published, or changes where now the profanity is fine and we are okay with allowing the review to be auto-published. An example of that would be the word crap in the UK. 5 years ago when I started at Tripadvisor was like the most horrible word. All of my UK business partners would say, we can't publish that word ever. But times have evolved, and so we're not quite as stringent on that word. And that's something that the business unit owners can do right away, the language experts can do on their own. For larger, more complex policy decisions, we do get together in a group, hold live discussions. We get people across various departments all across the globe, so we try to get as much perspective as possible and have live discussions to talk about various policies. An example of this might be relevancy in a review. So I think you can imagine that if somebody is reviewing the Eiffel Tower and they start going off about how terrible Kanye West's new album is, that's an easy removal, right? But we're talking about travel. So this is kind of unique too, where people are coming to the site. It's not a social media platform per se, because people are coming to plan their trips. So we have to determine how much of their review are we going to allow to go off of the main focus, which is their review of that property. So an example of something that might be a little bit more challenging is somebody reviews a local fish and chips shop. They hated it, they had a bad experience, and then they want to go in for 2 paragraphs and talk about how much the fish and chips shop down the street is way better and you should definitely go there. So we will meet and talk about those various issues and try to decide how much additional content outside of that primary focus is relevant to the review. We also have a Health, Safety, and Discrimination Committee, which is made up of public members from our public policy, corporate communications team, legal government affairs team, and with content. The goal of this group is to make sure that content that is related to health, safety, and discrimination issues is available and easily accessible to travelers, so that travelers are aware of issues when they're traveling to specific places. One thing to note that I should mention is that there is nobody from sales or the commerce side of the house on the Health, Safety, and Discrimination Committee. My team does not work with the health, safety, with sales or commerce regularly, so we have a very strict separation between content and the commerce side. We really we hold a lot of value in that. Review decisions do not take any input from the sales side of the house at all, ever. So that's how the magic happens at Tripadvisor.
I'm Del Harvey. I am the VP of Trust and Safety at Twitter, and I am going to talk with you guys about behaviors in moderation, which is a little different from the content moderation term that folks have been using. So basically, I want to first give you guys some context for how we think about this sort of thing, then a little bit about the structure around how we do policy creation, and then just touch on some of the best practices in our opinion. So for initial context, we have over 330 million monthly active users, which is a relatively large number. We support more than 50 languages. There are billions of tweets per week. And all of that is to say that in terms of what people do with the platform and what people do on the platform, we often find ourselves hearkening back to this particular quote. There are things that we know that people do. There are things that we are pretty sure maybe we don't know exactly what they're doing, but we kind of have an idea that they're doing it, or we know people who can explain to us what's going on. And then there are things where we're like, wow, I don't even know where these people are who might be doing these things that we don't know what they are. And all of that is to sort of say, given the context of the scale that we're dealing with, if you're talking about 1 billion tweets and everything goes perfectly right 99.999% of the time, then you're still talking about 10,000 tweets where everything might not have gone right. So when we're talking about billions of tweets per week, it gives you a whole new appreciation for the importance of scale. Or at least it gives me one, it may not give you one. We have, in order to address that, come up with a number of different policy teams, all of whom have sort of different areas of focus and sort of different end clients, if you will. Ads policy, most of this is named pretty intuitively. So ads policy generally works with advertisers. They're going to work to make sure that there's an understanding of what content is prohibited on the platform or what content is perhaps regulated. Then you have API policy that's going to be working with the developers. Information quality, which works to try to detect all sorts of different types of manipulation of the platform, whether that be through automation or cohorts of people trying to coordinate different types of attacks. Intellectual property and identity, which has everything from copyright to trademark to counterfeit to impersonation. Legal policy, which handles primarily government requests to remove content or law enforcement requests for user information. They also work on situations where emergencies come up or there's believed to be sort of imminent harm or danger to someone that we become aware of on the platform. Site policy handles a wide swath of content ranging from child safety, child sexual exploitation, terrorism, harassment, threats, anything in sort of the broad safety space falls into that category. And then spam deals with spam. As I said, these are all pretty intuitive. They actually used to be a lot less intuitive, and then over the years we decided that we could probably clean that up and come up with much clearer names for things. The way that all of these teams work, as you can imagine, with this many different teams, with this many users, with this much scale, it's really easy for policy creation to get sort of bogged down into an incoherent mess. And that's sometimes possible even when everything's going perfectly. But one of the ways that we've attempted to really combat that and to have a policy creation and policy update cycle that remains relatively crisp is by using a particular model called DASI. And that is, whichever the relevant trust and safety policy team is considered the driver. They're responsible for coming up with, here's the new policy that we're going to put out there. We're going to change this thing, or we need to start addressing this issue. And the way that they may have become aware of that could be through any number of means, but they are the ones who are sort of responsible for saying, we're going to craft a policy, and the approver is going to be me or my boss, our chief legal officer. Then there are contributors, and contributors honestly are often the lifeblood of this process. They are sometimes, I think sometimes they're described as having a voice but not necessarily a vote. So what they do is they give input. They say, hey, you're working on an issue in this region or this country. I'm actually a subject matter expert on what's happening here. And those could be people from public policy. Those could be members of the Trust and Safety Council, who are organizations, NGOs, and individuals from around the world who are recognized experts in their fields. Those could be people from user services who we partner with to do operations enforcement, or other external subject matter experts who we just happen to know or who are recommended to us as people who we should be talking to. Because again, one of the things that is really important for us to remember is that there's a lot of things that we don't necessarily know. We are not going to be subject matter experts in everything, try as we might, so it's really important that we work to identify people who are and listen to them and make sure that we work to understand what they're saying to us is an issue. Even if we don't think it's an issue, it's not impossible for us to be wrong. And oftentimes if there's a perception that there's an issue, that's still something that we need to address. And then finally, informed are the folks who we tell, hey, we have this policy, we've changed this policy, here's what the policy is, this is what we're going to do moving forward. We have found that that's one of the most effective ways to make sure that we can sort of keep moving through that policy development cycle and not have things get bogged down in terms of, two competing groups who are saying, well, I think it should be this, and I think it should be this. You have one primary driver who's really responsible for taking all of those inputs and synthesizing it into that policy or policy change. And I want to spend the rest of my time talking about best practices for us. And the first thing that is listed there is something that we feel very strongly about, which is essentially the people who we have working on this sort of thing are dealing with people who are generally doing bad things, right? They're violating our rules, they're violating our terms of service, they may be violating the law. It is not always pleasant to work in this field. It is challenging. You can be exposed to graphic content. It is something that it can really impact people. And we want to recognize that, and we want to make sure that we are taking that into consideration when we are staffing our employee resiliency programs. So for example, we have counseling, not just available, but depending upon the type of content that you work with, it may be mandated. And that is actually on purpose, because oftentimes we've found that even if you are dealing with really sensitive material, you may not realize that it's impacting you, or you may feel as though there's some sort of sense of bravado, right? Not wanting to show that it's affecting you, or not wanting to show that, it might impact how you're feeling. So by simply mandating that counseling, it means that we're in a much better place to make sure that people are getting help if they need it. And similarly, making sure that there are different paths to it, group sessions, individual sessions, making sure that there are ways to rotate depending upon the type of content that you may be reviewing, making sure that there's an open door policy around talking about challenges you may be having. We're fortunate enough to have a number of people who were previously at, for example, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who are now part of my organization. So we have people who are very familiar with handling, quite frankly, some really awful content, and who can sort of serve as mentors and guides to people who may be considering working on this content, or who may be starting to work on it for the first time. Another thing that is related to this that we think is extremely important is fully disclosing to people when they apply for a job if there is going to potentially be exposure to this type of content. So that's something that we have in our public-facing job recs that we post. It will have a note if that is something that you're likely to encounter. And again, that's just around setting expectations. We don't want anyone to be blindsided. We don't want anyone to not realize what they're going to be dealing with. So even though it's not pretty, it's not fluffy, but it's really important. And it's something that we feel very strongly about. In terms of actually getting things right when we're doing enforcement, one of the most important things that we've rolled out in the past couple of years is what we frame as cultural context trainings, which is we have people around the world. Turns out that Silicon Valley is not actually reflective of the whole of the world. A shocking revelation for some of us there. So by having these really nuanced cultural context trainings that the people who are working on reviewing reported tweets or accounts or what have you can reference to understand, hey, this looks really innocuous on the surface, but it's a reference to this particular event, and that means it is actually a problem. Or there's a really hot political discussion that's happening in this country, and these are the two main issues. So even though this is heated, this is actually just two people exchanging views on a political event. And having those sorts of trainings and then reference materials available for the people who are reviewing what's getting reported is really important. And related to that, the world changes. What people are doing changes. So it is absolutely crucial that you have a regular cadence of refreshers and updates to this content. You can't just sort of set it and forget it. You can't be like, well, we've done the training. All right, we'll check back in a decade or so. No, this is something that you are looking at constantly, and you have to have a mechanism in place to push those updates out. That's easy when you're dealing with a relatively small number of reviewers. It gets much harder when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of people who could be reviewing this content. So by thinking about how you can implement that from the beginning, you set yourself up for success a lot more. The fourth, cross-functional collaboration and partnerships. This is both within the company and with people outside of the company. I referenced how, for example, contributors to policy development include people from the Trust and Safety Council or external subject matter experts. Again, we don't know everything. By partnering with others, by being really open to the feedback that we get or to the issues that are raised to us, it makes it a lot easier to not only act quickly and as accurately as possible, but also to build sort of relationships in good faith between us and people who maybe had assumed that we didn't care or that we weren't listening. And the more that we can demonstrate that we really do want to hear from people and that we really do want to partner on getting things right, the more we find that people actually seek us out and say, hey, this hasn't risen to the level of becoming a problem yet, but we thought you might want to know that we're starting to see X. And that's something that we've really found to be super useful. Similarly, we partner with product to make sure that while they're building things or new features or what have you, that we can work with them from when they just first start designing all the way through launch to make sure that we are building in protections for everything that we're doing for the users as well. And that's been a really successful thing. And then finally, growth mindset. I've said that throughout this whole thing, we totally realize that we can be wrong. We always want to make sure we're getting better. None of our policies are set in stone. We are fortunate that we have a great feedback loop through Twitter, because people yell at us on Twitter when they feel like they're not doing things right at Twitter. So my @replies are sometimes our feedback mechanism, but that is something that is actually, again, just by sort of being open to, hey, just because it's how we've always done it, definitely doesn't mean that's how we should be doing it moving forward. And by just being open to people saying, hey, you're getting this completely wrong, and approaching it from the standpoint of, okay, let's say we are. What do we do now? And that's it for me. Thank you.
I'm Shirin Keen. I'm an Associate General Counsel at Twitch, and I'm here to talk about trust and safety and how we do it at Twitch. And for the uninitiated, I wanted to first give you a quick look at what Twitch is. So Twitch is a social video service for broadcasters and their audiences to interact in real time over shared passions, primarily gaming content. And so it all starts with the broadcaster page or channel page, which is what you see here. And you have Ninja, who's one of our most popular broadcasters, playing Fortnite, a game, and you can see him playing live in-game, interacting with other players who are also playing the game, and broadcasting that gameplay content on Twitch. And in the video box that you see, there's a number of UGC items. There's, of course, the game stream and his sort of voiceover and what he's talking about as he's playing the game. There's overlays or extensions, so third-party developers can create overlays specifically for Twitch that allow broadcasters and their audiences to customize their experience of what they're watching. There are other third-party tools that do overlays like you see at the bottom there, just sort of with stats about the game or some of the chat messages or other things showing up on that video screen. And then the broadcasters really build their community through the live chat experience that you see to the right of the frame, where all the people watching this broadcasters can interact with the broadcaster and with each other in real time. And so you see there's about 124,000 people watching Ninja play. He hit one of the biggest records on Twitch
playing with Drake, about 630,000 people watching him play, or watching them play and chatting on Twitch at the same time. So as you can imagine, things, when you have all this content, you have things moving really, really quickly with 124,000 or 600,000 people watching content and interacting with each other and chatting at the same time. And it gives you a sense of the challenges that our moderation team may face when they're trying to moderate content that has to take into account not just a single medium of content, but how those mediums relate to each other, because the chat is responding to the broadcaster and vice versa, and what they're watching on screen. And part of this fast-moving experience has also involved a creation of unique language on Twitch through emotes. So you'll see sort of, again, in the chat window, you see a bunch of hearts with ninjas. And so that's one of the emotes that Ninja offers to his subscribers, and here they're expressing their love for Ninja. But there are a lot of cases where, you know, people are using those emotes in ways to express all sorts of things, and the language of those emotes keeps evolving as well. And how our broadcasters are able to be successful on Twitch is not just through ad-supported content, but also through subscriptions, where although the content is free to watch, access to these emotes is very precious, and people pay to get access to the emotes, but also to support the broadcasters whose content they really enjoy. Another form of them being able to support these broadcasters is a feature called cheering, where the community members may buy special emotes called bits, and then they use them to cheer in the broadcaster's channel. And then you can see sort of at the bottom of the chat, you'll see a message deleted. So again, all of this content is being moderated. So one of our core values at Twitch is creators first. And one of the reasons that trust and safety and moderation is really important to our business is that we know that moderation leading to greater trust and safety leads to greater creator success on Twitch. So we know through statistics, user studies, other things, that when you have a lot of toxicity or bad behavior online, you lose users. And for these creators, if they don't have users who are on their platform or on their channel supporting them, they're not going to be successful. So really, again, moderation and trust and safety is core to our business, not just because it's a good thing, but because it's good business. So, our goals on trust and safety are to maintain effective policies and tools. Our community guidelines overlay our basic terms of service, and they sort of really indicate to the community what the expectations are for good and bad behavior on Twitch, through tools like tools for user reporting, processing those reports, and then some automated tools for filtering, such as Audible Magic, which is against music content, or AutoMod, which is specifically for chat content. It uses machine learning algorithms to filter out content as set by the broadcaster. Our moderation and trust and safety teams have a goal to enforce policies consistently. They are available 24/7, 365, doing that. And the really remarkable thing is that they work on a 5-minute SLA for reported content. And there's times, of course, that if there's more complicated investigation needed, that may take longer. But for our business, because this is all live ephemeral content, it is really critical to remove content as quickly as possible so that the feedback to bad behavior is as immediate as possible. Otherwise, it sort of goes into the ether and may not, and our overall goals on increasing trust and safety are damaged. So that 5-minute SLA and sort of the quickness and live nature of our content really informs a lot of what we do on the policy and enforcement side. So the structure at Twitch right now, and we've tried this a few different ways, but always evolving in a growth mindset. So currently we have a trust and safety, which is a team which is more operational, and that's where we have people working on policy and enforcement. We have only about 30 people in-house who work on enforcement matters, given the scale of, again, what we do and how quickly we have to do it. That's pretty incredible. And then we have a trust, and that team ultimately reports into our COO. And then we have a trust and safety products team that sits within our product organization, and there's about 2 or 3 product managers, and then 6 to 8 engineers working on building tools specifically for safety. Now, of course, there's additional teams on the product side that are working on identity, fraud, other issues like that, but really this is the team that's focused on the safety products in particular. So policy development, sorry. Yeah, and then we've of course got legal, data science, program management, and marketing all also helping these teams. Not necessarily anybody who's dedicated full-time, but we're working on that. And just a plug, we are hiring for the head of trust and safety role that you see at the, on the trust and safety ops side. So if anyone's interested, please do talk to me. So on the policy development side, you know, our policy development process thus far has been mostly in response to new product and content launches. And just to pause for a second on the history and origin of Twitch, we evolved originally from Justin TV, which was also a live streaming video social platform, but it was more open-ended in terms of the content that was on the service. Twitch really started with a focus on gaming, and so up till about 2 to 3 years ago, we were able to short-circuit a lot of policy issues simply because it was non-gaming content that was not allowed on our service. Of course, any sort of mandatory reporting and all those things still applied, and we would, of course, report any content that was escalated that was generally prohibited under the law, but really a lot of the you know, issues around speech and a lot of the more thorny issues could be avoided by simply, you know, deeming it non-gaming. And that, again, helped in our faster SLAs and in the policy and enforcement frameworks we developed. But we found that the same communities that had formed to share their love of gaming were also wanting to come together to share their love of other content. So in 2015, we launched a category called creative. And again, we very carefully defined what type of content was still allowed on Twitch. And so outside of gaming and creative, not much else. And then over time, we've opened it further. And so now I think we have a content category called IRL, which can end up capturing almost all content and a whole range of issues. So as we developed these new product and content launches, you know, we of course took a really deep look at our policies and had to upgrade them. Our early community guidelines were very gamer focused, you know, sort of used a lot of in-language, gaming language, and we broadened that a lot more. Other things that may instigate policy changes are feedback from our enforcement efforts, legal or other external developments, like maybe something's, you know, happening in the game industry and sort of the rules that game developers and publishers are sharing that affects the content that's going to be shared on Twitch. And then there's just constant iteration of our internal enforcement guidelines. So the policy, sort of the drivers are primarily Ryan Kennedy and myself, who sort of take the first crack at the policies, and then we get a lot of feedback from our content team, our partnerships team, customer support community, and really the partnerships and community teams are the ones who have a lot of pulse on our creators, and through them you get, and sometimes directly getting feedback from creators themselves is really valuable, so that we really can come up with policies that are diverse, are capturing their concerns, A lot of our creators and our users really are international, so we get a lot of diversity of opinion from that perspective as well. And we do consult with external experts. We have some relationships with a few different organizations or different organizations even within gaming that work on these issues and want to talk to each other. But I think one of the goals for this year and beyond is really improving some of our operational cadences around policy development and formalizing that process a little bit more to meet some of the goals that Del was talking about. On the enforcement side, our moderators do a lot of the same things most enforcement teams do. We do, in addition to taking down content, we do issue strikes against a user's record. And one of the things we're working on is improving or fine-tuning the punishments we apply to bad behavior that violates our community guidelines, with a goal towards both sort of providing carrots and sticks and ensuring that the rules are followed. So all reported incidents are reviewed by human moderators because, again, machines really can't get not just context, but all the layers of context when you're looking at the content on Twitch, right? Like you have to imagine that the machine would have to know gaming culture and language. They would need to know the in-references in that history. They would need to know the meanings of emotes. They would need to know how they're interacting against live video content. And so they're not quite there yet in handling that level of complexity. The moderators themselves come very much from the community, and so they have that deep cultural background and experience. We do have moderators who cover a range of different languages that our service is offered in and who are located across the globe. And they respond to user reports primarily. The reason why, or one of the reasons why we're able to do moderation on this scale while having such a small internal staff is because in addition to the site-wide moderation, we also have a community-based moderation approach where all these broadcasters who recognize, again, that their success is tied in with good behavior on Twitch and the kind of communities they want to create on Twitch, set their own rules for behavior on their channels, and they will often appoint moderators for their own channel who might be members of their community, sort of fans of theirs, other people that they know may hire or otherwise work with to moderate their own channels. So they're able to reduce the surface area that our staff have to deal with. Other ways that we try to reduce, again, the surface area that our human moderators have to touch are automated detection tools, spam identification, automod, as I'd mentioned, which is really something that, again, we've customized so that the broadcaster can choose the level of moderation that they want on their channel and set it for their community. And then, again, third-party tools like bots that also help with moderation and help our broadcasters moderate against their own content or content on their channels on Twitch. That's it.
Hi, so I am Sean Mcgilvray. I run the trust and safety team at Vimeo. We are in charge of a lot of different aspects. My title is Director of Legal Affairs and Trust and Safety. And I thought we'll definitely get into the nitty-gritty of under the hood, but I wanted to start by just giving a little bit of basic information about what Vimeo is, because I think a lot of times we talk about the specifics of content moderation or liability avoidance risk assessment, but really everything that we do in the trust and safety or content moderation space is driven by our community. And as much as we would like to, that's not something that we can sort of instigate from the top down. It has to come from a conversation with our users. To a certain degree, they'll tell us what our platform is, and we'll tell them whether or not we agree, and somewhere in the middle is where Vimeo comes from. So a little bit about Vimeo. We are a video hosting platform. This is the sort of ad-approved copy. We empower video creators of all kinds to tell exceptional stories and connect with their audiences and communities. We have more than 70 million members in over 150 countries, and we are the world's largest ad-free open video platform. And I highlight these points because I think each of them sort of informs the way that trust and safety and content moderation works for us. It's definitely something we keep in mind with our mission statement. And this is the mission statement of the trust and safety team. So this is sort of our core goals within the larger goals of the company. And there's basically 4 aspects to it, and each focuses on sort of a different stakeholder in the importance of content moderation and trust and safety. So we want to make our creators feel comfortable sharing their work. We want, we really differentiate ourselves by appealing to creative professionals. As my wife defines Vimeo, it's, aren't you guys basically YouTube for hipsters? And there's some truth to that, but, or at least there definitely was in the early days, but, as we've grown as a company and focused more and more on professional users of all kinds, businesses and different organizations use us as a host for a premium video sharing experience. But we still have that creators first attitude from when we were initially created as a video sharing site for creative professionals. So it's about creating a space for what I like to think of as intentional videos. A lot of other platforms, they're great places to post videos you took on your phone of a cat falling asleep and sliding off a counter. We'll take those because we love cat videos, but we're a little more interested in, an awesome documentary about animal rights abuses in your hometown, or, a really cutting edge narrative short film about the 9 lives of cats. Something that has a little more intentionality, a little more artisan craftsmanship to it. We also try to make sure the audience feels safe. So if you create a great place for creators, they need an audience to be able to see what they made. And if their feeds are full of porn and all kinds of other nastiness, that's not going to be the case. So we want to make a safe and welcoming space for you to go and find those videos. We also want partners that we work with, different staffing directors or branding partners that we might work with. And of course, sort of underlying everything else is we want to make the company itself compliant with all applicable laws, and not sued is huge, and almost equally as huge is not blocked. We're not serving anybody if we're dark. So, we try to make sure that we're in line with local laws as much as possible, and really take steps to make sure that we're complying while still respecting freedom of expression and encouraging cutting edge work that might push a few buttons and walk a few lines. So that's why trust and safety at Vimeo is never boring. As far as the structure goes, we're a relatively small team. There's actually 5 specialists, and we have 1 dedicated developer who works with us on tooling and making product changes. We work with a bunch of other teams within Vimeo. We work very closely with the community support team and community managers. We work very closely with our machine learning team and different product groups. So there's a lot of bubbling up, but sort of the main trust and safety group is independent. We are technically part of the legal department, but as I said, we work very closely with the community support team. When asked to define what trust and safety is, I usually refer to this Venn diagram where you have legal on one side, attention to detail, compliance, risk assessment, very measured and careful strategic thinking, and then community on the other, which is keeping the community in mind, being able to communicate our decisions in language that is accessible to humans and sounds like it was actually spoken by a human, or at least a reasonable facsimile thereof. And then right in that GUI center is where trust and safety at Vimeo lives. We have a very broad remit. We are there to enforce Vimeo's terms of service and community guidelines. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty wide net to cast. So we deal with copyright and trademark infringement, privacy complaints, defamation, sextortion, pornography, hate speech, extremist propaganda, spam, fraud, abuse, harassment, basically every bad thing that a user could upload a video to do, they at least try to do on our platform. And we have sort of a broad remit to handle all those different things. And so the way that works in practice, and you can imagine that's not always easy. Typically, there's what I like to think of as an intake phase, which is how do we discover content before making a moderation decision. User flagging is huge. I think you've heard that from all of us. Our users outnumber us by an incredible number, and there's just a lot more eyes out there that they have to, whether they come across something by accident, maybe they were looking for something else. Allowing them to easily alert us to content is a huge part of finding it. And then, of course, there's also more formal takedown procedures, DMCA notices, cease and desist for trademark. We get a lot of very nicely worded alerts from internet reporting units for extremist content. We get some less nicely worded takedown demands from certain censorship bodies in different countries around the world. So that's a good way to draw the eye of Sauron to something. We also, of course, with the number of moderators to videos, we have algorithmic detection. That works in a lot of different ways and sort of layers in with a bunch of different tools, but it's everything from a really simple stop words based keyword regimen to looking at user behavior, velocity from sign up to posting and a bunch of other things, and taking sometimes automatic action for the really programmatic things like spam or rips of television shows that are really easy to identify, and also more contextual things that might be speech issues or issues of expression. And there's also proactive investigation. So there are things that we look for. It's not entirely reactive. I would say the balance tips in favor of user flagging, just because, like I said, there's so many more users. But we will often use that as a springboard, depending on the type of content. Maybe a user reports an instance of child pornography or something that harms or exploits a minor. We'll take that down, obviously. We'll go through the investigation phase, and we'll find every account that interacted with that piece of content. So, we'll look at who watched it, who shared it. If someone was crazy enough to put that on their Facebook wall, we'll try and figure out what they were thinking, and we'll take down networks of related accounts. We'll do similar things for extremist content. So it's really a matter of the type of content and whether or not it warrants that extra step of investigation. And so once we find out about it, we have to make a decision, right? So the trust and safety team has broad discretion. The vast majority of content we can make the call on. And a lot of it is, I don't want to say simple, but once you've seen one porn video, they become pretty easy to recognize. We have some tools that we can sort of scrub through them very fast. We can see different thumbnails. So we don't have to spend, if it's a 6-minute video, we don't have to watch every single frame if we can determine pretty quickly that it's pornographic or it's an ISIS video or something that's very easy to eyeball from a high level. But that's the vast majority, but there are definitely edge cases and outliers. There's a bunch of oddballs, and that's usually what drives a decision to update or add a new policy or tweak an existing policy is when we come across something that doesn't fit. The first thing we try to do is this covered by an existing rule? No. Is it analogous to an existing rule? Can we classify this as hate speech? Can we classify this as a form of abuse? And if the answer is no, then we have to have the policy discussion. And it usually works. It starts at that individual moderator level, and then there's sort of a consensus building that can happen within the larger trust and safety team. We'll share videos, usually in a Slack channel, or if we're all in the same place, we'll spin our desks around and say, what do you think of this? Is this, do we have a rule that covers this? Do we need to make one? How do we feel about this? And that solves most issues, but some don't. And so the next step would be like a legal review. So, I would give my 2 cents, I would take it to my boss or general counsel, and we would decide, is there a legal obligation to remove this? Does it violate a local law? Is there a compliance issue? And if the answer is no, that's when the conversation expands a little bit. We'll bring in sort of a different working group with different brand and culture stakeholders. So it'll typically be representatives from the community support team, community managers, comms, sales, and just some OG Vimians, people who have been with the company for a long time and really have a stake in our reputation and the kind of community that we have built and want to maintain. And then sort of through those discussions, that will drive whether or not we need to create a new policy, and then we'll follow through and add it as necessary. And then the last phase is what I call aftercare. That's where the investigation of related accounts happens. That's where any legally mandated reporting to NCMEC or anybody else might happen. It also covers user appeals and remediation. Part of the reason why, I didn't mention it, I meant to do it on my Venn diagram slide, but the components of the team is composed almost equally of people with legal backgrounds and people with operational or community support backgrounds. And the reason we do that is because we want people who can make really well thought out and principled decisions in ambiguous areas, but do so in a way where they can explain those decisions later when the users appeal. So we operate, there's some exceptions for escalation procedures and stuff, but essentially we operate on a you kill it, you clean it basis. So if you take down a video and that person writes in to complain or appeal, you have to explain your decision and your reasoning. Those are obviously subject to quality control review and escalation processes, but that's sort of the core assumption. And the idea is that if you can't articulate to the person who uploaded that video why they violated, then you probably had no business taking it down in the first place. If you can't do it in terms they can understand. And there is a remediation aspect. We have to decide whether or not we're going to remove a single video or an entire account. Some accounts can be remediated, maybe they just made a mistake or they were unclear. Some guidelines can be ambiguous and we can learn from that. So, whenever possible, if we think an account can be saved, I always tell the team, don't feel like you have to stick to your guns. If they, show a willingness to change their behavior, they explain, how they misunderstood the guideline, and we feel that the account can be salvaged and be a good contributing member of the Vimeo community, then, there's no reason not to reverse a decision. We're not parents, and because I said so, it doesn't typically be where things end. So just a few challenges that Vimeo faces. So we don't allow pornography, but we do allow nudity and some sexual content as long as it serves an artistic, narrative, or documentary purpose. So we're kind of stuck in that Justice Potter, we know it when we see it area, and that is a legacy. Vimeo has always been that way, and it comes from that, that sort of history of appealing to edgy filmmakers who want to push that HBO line and make really sort of boundary-pushing artwork. We wanted to have a place for that. If I were to write the whole thing from the top down, I might go for something a little more binary, a little easier to enforce, but that's where we are, and we have to serve the community by enforcing that. But it does mean that we make a lot of we make a lot of decisions that seem like we make a lot of decisions based on sort of internal guidelines and external guidelines that can bear the appearance of being very subjective. We try to be as objective as possible, but to the outside, if we don't share our nipple appearance timing index publicly, then it can look capricious, which is definitely a challenge. This is Como at scale. Scale is an issue. We are not as large as some other platforms, but we're pretty large and growing, and we are a small team. So there are a lot of tools that we use to address that, but it's definitely a challenge that we face. Similarly, we are a global platform. We're an American company. We sit in Chelsea in New York, but we have users all over the world, and especially in the areas of content moderation. If we get a video and it's a guy with a shaved head and a leather jacket banging his fist and sort of yelling at the camera and speaking Belarusian, well, I don't speak that language. No one on my team does. I'm pretty sure he's not sharing a borscht recipe. But without finding a subject matter expert or somebody who speaks that language, it's hard to know for sure. So we try to look for whatever context clues we can. Are there swastikas hanging in the background? Do we recognize the music? Is we look for whatever we can, and then we find language experts and subject matter experts within the company or with third parties that we contract with, but it's definitely a challenge. We also deal with spam, which is a huge challenge for us. Spammers are tireless, highly automated, and fighting them is both like a technical and a moderation issue, and bringing that all together, bots never sleep, we do, so that's one issue that we've run into. Also, we are an ad-free platform, which is great, but it presents some challenges. It means that we don't have a path to monetization, especially in the music licensing field. So we're fully compliant with the DMCA, so when rights holders discover a video that uses a song and infringes their copyright, they have to let us know, we have to take it down, but there's no sort of ad sharing revenue agreement we can enter with them. It's very binary. It's either take it down or don't, and of course we do. But and related to that is, we have a professional user base. Something like, almost 50% of our users are some form of professional filmmaker, editors, videographers, whatever. And they can be creative professionals, and they make amazing stuff, but they can also be very temperamental. Their understanding of copyright law or the finer points of privacy legislation, it might not be up there, so they require a lot of hand-holding. We do have some advantages, and the ads thing is actually one of those as well. Because there's no monetization program, it's more of a platform to just share work. And we do have a very positive community. They have always been very focused on sharing work and critiquing it, but doing so in a very positive environment. So that's actually tipped our scale just a little bit in favor of maintaining a place where people can be nice, even if they're being critical, and a little less in being a pure free speech platform. So our thumb has always been a little bit on that scale. We've been quick to remove comments or user-to-user interactions where the tone gets abusive. We do that very quickly, or videos that are abusive or harassing, just because it doesn't fit with the idea of what the community wants or is. And we also have the advantage of, we're just a video hosting platform. We deal with videos. We don't have to deal with all the different types of speech, videos, text posts, images, user-to-user communication, user-to-general public communication. It's basically just videos, a little bit in the comments and discussions around those, but essentially we're just moderating one type of content. And as some of my colleagues mentioned, with a great community comes some very motivated flaggers. So we have people that take Vimeo very seriously, and they spend a lot of time flagging content that they believe violates our rules, and makes Vimeo the type of place that they don't want to be. And we listen to them. We have a few tricks on the back end that lets them, that weights some of the more successful flaggers so that their flags bubble up a little bit quicker, because we've seen over time that they have a very good grasp on what we do and don't allow. And if their flags are more likely to end in removal, then we bubble that up a little bit. Thank you. That is Trust and Safety, Content Moderation of Vimeo.
I'm going to take the moderation of the questions for the first two morning panels. I know we're past break time, so I think we're just going to do one question for this group now. And this comes from the field. In content moderation at your platform, what's currently not working as well as you'd like? If you could give me one or two quick answers, and then we'll wrap it up and go to break. So do we want to start at the far end, maybe?
Sure. I think the battle that we're always fighting is that how much can we automate without risking quality? I think probably everybody can agree with me on this panel. We don't have unlimited resources as much as we would love if we did. So we need to figure out where we can make compromises, where we can reduce risk in automation, and determine what's the most valuable thing for the people that are actually working to be looking at.
Yeah, I think, from the content moderation perspective, you're always looking to do more, right? You're looking to do more while also being asked to do it with less. And so I think that, with all of the different changes that are coming out, and the constantly evolving types of content that you're looking for, whether it's, some of our platforms are just starting to get into video, so we don't have quite the set of tools yet on the video side, but we're still working on that. So we've just got, all the types of content new and progressing, while at the same time being faced with budget constraints, so.
I would say a very similar challenge, primarily around the resources and time to build things as quickly as possible, to have better tooling and better data so that we can make better decisions and make the job of the enforcement team a lot easier and consistent and transparent.
I would certainly echo all of that. I think two other areas that there are certainly efforts underway in, but I would love to see everyone continue pushing, are transparency around the actions that we take, around why we're taking those actions, and so on. I know that Twitter certainly has a significant amount of work planned in that space, and I know that some of our peers do as well, but I'd love for the industry as a whole to really keep pushing forward on that. And relatedly, honestly, just continuing to share best practices across industry and continuing to make sure that people know who to reach out to if they're new in the space and maybe want to know some of the things that we've already figured out don't work so well. We all, I'm pretty sure, have a list of those, and I think we're all generally happy to share that.
And just a plug, we will have a panel on transparency in the afternoon to get to take a look at that more closely.
And going last, I would also like to piggyback on I share everything that they just said. I would drill down on one specific aspect of it, and I talked about this a little bit during my presentation, is, it is important to strike the right balance between automation and human review, but you have to keep in mind that, we're engaged in sort of an automation arms race with like spam bots and, fake follower accounts and, just really highly automated adversaries. And so, we have to make sure that we pitch our automation human review balance in a way that keeps us competitive with them.